The social cognitive theory originally started as the social learning theory in the 1960s. It was developed into the social cognitive theory in the late 1980s, and it suggests that learning occurs in a social context with a dynamic and reciprocal interaction of the person, the environment, as well as the behavior. The key components of the social cognitive theory that are related to an individual behavior change include self-efficacy, which is the belief that an individual has control and is able to execute an behavior, expectations, which is determining the outcomes of a behavior change, behavioral capability, which means that someone understands and has the skills to perform the behavior, self-control, which means that they regulate and monitor the individual behavior, expectancies, so they're assigning a value to the outcome of what the behavior change will induce, observational learning, which means they watch and observe outcomes of others who perform and model the behavior that they would like to try, as well as reinforcements, so promoting different incentives and awards that may encourage someone to do that behavior change. You can see in our example, we have a few funny pictures. The first, from the cognitive factors, might be someone's attitude about exercise. Well, this person loves to sweat, so they have a positive attitude towards one of the different side effects that they might have through doing exercise. On the bottom right, you notice a person that should be doing a hamstring curl. Instead, somehow they've managed to get their head on the part of the machine that's supposed to move. So clearly this person doesn't have the skill to be able to do this activity and could use some assistance, despite having enjoyment in sweating. One of the influences that affects us a lot in our behaviors is what is the social norm. Within the United States, it's very common to drive everywhere as opposed to walk or ride a bicycle, as you see in the pictures on the left-hand side. Whereas in other countries, it's very socially acceptable to ride a bike or walk everywhere as opposed to driving. In the United States, we equate driving with wealth and status, whereas in other countries, they might equate that as being wasteful and harmful to the environment. So you're going to generally do or assimilate to the environment that you exist in. Not always, but it's pretty common. This social cognitive theory does a nice job of highlighting how these different factors all influence each other, or at least can influence each other. And you can probably think of examples for yourself about how the environment, your behavior skills, and your own cognitive factors influence a behavior. There are a few key components to every successful intervention for a behavior change. The first part of that component is that you're meeting them in the stage that they're in. If they're in the pre-contemplation stage, that's where you should meet them as far as how you're going to intervene. If they're in the preparation stage, that's where you want to meet them as far as what their preparation is going to be for the behavior change. You don't want to jump ahead to where someone's prepared to be, or you're unlikely to have success in that intervention with them. You want to make sure you address someone's own self-efficacy. So this is their confidence in their ability to make sure this behavior change can be successful. You also want to make sure that you've gone through the pros and the cons of that behavior change with them, and that they know those pros are going to outweigh any of those cons that they've come up with. Sometimes when you have to increase someone's confidence about that behavior change, it's showing them that they have the skill set to do that. So one of the ways that you can increase self-efficacy is to help someone a lot initially. Maybe you're teaching them a lot about good form whenever they're doing resistance training exercise. Maybe you're teaching them or actually doing the aerobic exercise with them. That way they're gaining that confidence that they could do this alone when they're asked to. Also, always keep someone else's motivation at the forefront of the intervention program. If they're very unmotivated, they may be relying a lot on some external motivation factors. However, if they're very internally motivated, you need to know what's making them tick and help support that in their behavior change. As you think about the very difficult task of encouraging the inactive and unmotivated client someday, it's important that you think about a few important principles. One is that you need to present information in a convincing manner. Remember, they're in that decisional balance component where they're trying to decide if that behavior change would be a pro instead of a con. And so they're weighing the pros and cons of doing that behavior change, and you're trying to shift them into thinking that it would be overall a benefit to them if they made that behavior change. You also want it to be personal. Never use a cookie cutter approach unless you want to be ineffective. It's important that you deliver a personal message to that individual and you don't treat them the same as you treat every other client. People want to know that you're attuned to them as an individual and you understand their own needs and desires. Treating everyone the same is a really poor approach, and it shows that you're being lazy in your professional delivery. So make sure you take the time to be individualized. It doesn't mean you don't have a skeleton for how you might work with each client. However, you need to make sure you tailor that for the specific person you're working with. Finally, you've got to make sure you're timely. Think about what stage of change that person is in. Are they open to a direct approach, or do you need to be more broad in trying to motivate them to make some sort of behavior change? Now, using role models can be a really good strategy for some individuals, but you need to be careful about who the role model is, thinking about the personality of the client that you're working with. So someone who's currently a couch potato, does no physical activity, and is overweight, a good role model for them might not be a high-level athlete who is highly physically active. Instead, a much better role model for that person might be someone who has a similar history to their own, who's overcome some of the same obstacles. Maybe they work a full-time job, they're a single parent, and they're having to find the time to make these behavior changes. That can be a much stronger role model than someone who doesn't have a similar history or past. Now, that's not to say professional athletes aren't motivating to individuals. They certainly can be. But you've got to think about what's going to work for the personality type of the person that you are working with. As you take the time to build rapport with your new client, it's important that you sit down and in your conversation with them, you assess the various environmental, social, and personal factors that might be currently influencing their physical activity levels. From there, you're then able to establish what is their motivation and their goals, what are the things that are going to support them in this behavior change, and what are various barriers that might work against them in this behavior change. You might also establish what's their current physical activity level, because that's going to help you establish the goals. This basic background information is going to be essential for you as a practitioner to be effective in helping someone start a behavior change as well as continue with that behavior change. Without this information, you're not going to be aware of the bumps in the road that might occur for your client and how to coach them around getting through those bumps. In addition to helping someone set goals, having behavioral contracts and time management training are essential. Some people need some sort of accountability outside of themselves, and you as their fitness professional or healthcare provider serve as that accountability. So you'll notice in your book you have basic examples of what a behavioral contract might look like. So this person is committing and signing their name to the fact that they're going to do the best in their power to complete these activities around this behavior change. Also, time management. Sometimes we're really overwhelmed and we create poor habits around time management. A common example is when someone says, I have no time to exercise in my schedule. That's highly unlikely. You can work with them to go through their schedule and think about where are they losing time, or how can they just be more efficient with their time and work exercise into their regular schedule. You'd be surprised, but time is one of the primary reasons that people say they can't do exercise. But yet we know that's an easily rectified issue that someone needs to overcome. There are so many personal influences on whether or not someone will exercise, and I just want to highlight a couple of the really important ones. One is someone's perception of their health. There are a lot of people out there who think they're really healthy, despite the fact that they have poor diets and are doing minimal physical activity. Now, eventually that's going to catch up to them. So it's important to educate someone about their overall health. Sometimes they're going just based on what they look like. And if they're relatively thin, their clothes all fit okay, they think they're the pinnacle of health. However, we want to help educate people that sometimes some of the health benefits that you gain from exercise aren't things that can be seen. One that we've talked a lot about already is time, and you're going to have to work with individuals on time management. This is oddly enough not a skill that many people have, And as Americans, we're really good at filling our calendars with just a ton of to-dos. We try and cram so many activities into one day. So how can you build in physical activity into a schedule that's already seemingly jam-packed? There are some people who say they just don't enjoy exercise. And I'll tell you what, I just don't believe that. For someone who says that they don't enjoy exercise, I don't think they found the right exercise to do. Oftentimes, people think you can only do the exercise that you see in a gym. A treadmill, a bicycle, an elliptical, a stair climber, and weights. And that's just not true. There are so many other activities that can be done. People can dance, they can swim, they can do outdoor activities like kayaking and biking and running and hiking. There are so many sports that can be played. So try and get creative and expose people to a lot of activities if they think they just don't like activities, and specifically exercise, because I bet you they're going to find something they do enjoy. Finally, you'll want to address any self-efficacy issues. Make sure you build someone's confidence that they can do that physical activity on their own, as well as continue to grow in that activity and improve. So here's a question for you. I was an athlete in high school, or it could just be anybody. Is that going to increase, decrease, or not affect their motivation to do exercise when they get older? So this is actually a tricky answer. It really depends on the experience that someone had in being a high school athlete. So here's a good example. Did your coach ever make you run as punishment? Well, for individuals who had to run as punishment, they often don't then enjoy running after they're done participating in that sport because it has a negative connotation for them. Whereas for someone who is a cross-country runner, they might really enjoy running after they finish their sport and are just a recreational athlete or someone working on their health. So it is all dependent on what someone's background is. Don't make assumptions that just because someone either was or was not physically active in their youth, that somehow is automatically going to affect their motivation in either a positive or a negative way. You've got to build rapport and have that conversation with them so that you can know how it's affecting their motivation.
Motivation is another variable influencing exercise adoption. Remember that intrinsic motivation is the most self-determined, whereas extrinsic motivation is based on satisfying others or on the consequences of the behavior, meaning maybe you get a reward. We define self-motivation for exercise as the ability to continue an exercise program without the benefit of any sort of external reinforcement. Generally, those individuals who are highly self-motivated have more success when it comes to goal setting, monitoring exercise progress, as well as self-reinforcement. And it's no surprise that they often are highly intrinsically motivated. Individuals who have little self-motivation tend to need to rely on external reinforcement and encouragement. You can do this by having them do group fitness programs or helping them set up some sort of social support in order to adopt and adhere the exercise program. However, your goal is to help them develop some sort of intrinsic motivation so that they can transition and be more self-reliant in their behavior change. It's important that you don't disregard autonomy in how your client engages in what type of activities that they're going to be doing. If individuals believe they have more control over the different types of exercises and they have choices about when and how they exercise, they're much more likely to begin a program. So don't become a dictator and telling individuals exactly what they need to do. Involve them in the process.
There are many social influences for exercise. You might have heard of a term called social facilitation, in which when people exercise together, they actually exercise harder and for a longer duration when they're in the presence of others as opposed to by themselves. And so that's a classic study from sports psychology. However, we know that certain individuals are going to do better whenever they have exercising people with them. So they're not good as that lone wolf who goes out and exercises alone. They're going to thrive in a group exercise environment. But that's not going to be true of everybody. Some people actually really enjoy the meditative state of exercising by themselves. However, something that's good for all people is having a support network. If your loved ones, your friends, and your family all support your healthy behavior of doing physical activity, you are more likely to be successful doing that physical activity. If you've got a significant other or friends who don't do that activity, or they look down at that activity in particular, they think exercise is dumb, maybe they don't do exercise, they think it's silly, or they're upset with you for carving out time to do that activity, that's really going to hinder your ability to make that behavior change. So think about that when you're working with a client. Maybe you have someone who's really struggling to make a behavior change to start exercising. Well, do they have a friend or family member that you can wrap into the process to help them be more successful? We're social beings and we thrive as being part of a community. So help people grow their community for making a healthy behavior change around physical activity. There are many environmental factors that are going to influence exercise. So we've already discussed time, but what about the built environment? Someone who lives somewhere that has safe places to recreate, whether that's a gym or parks nearby or sidewalks, are going to be more likely to exercise than individuals who don't have access to that. So when you're working with someone, you might actually have to help them find these resources in their own community so that they have the built environment to be able to exercise more often in a more safe capacity. Also, some decisional prompts, right? If you're working with someone who goes to work, ask them to park further away from their building if it's safe to do so. Everybody has to go shopping for groceries and for other household things. Park further away in the parking lot so that you have to walk farther in these instances. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. What are some just daily modifications that you can make in your own environment that exists to increase your physical activity?